There is nothing new in the world except the history you do not know. Welcome to the Sales History Podcast. I'm your host, narrator, nerd, Todd Caponi. Welcome back. So far, we've discussed some of the stories, the pioneers, the perceptions, and education in sales professions past. But today, let's get weird. Today, we're going to discuss the prominence and pervasiveness of character analysis in sales in the early 20th century. And you ask, what is character analysis? Well, the thought was that if you could find a shortcut to reading someone's inner character and thoughts, that discovery would be an incredible aid to all walks of life, but especially the sales profession. For my research, there were waves of character analysis philosophies and methodologies not only imparted to sales organizations, but fully embraced. Things as crazy as like astrology as a sales methodology, or palmistry, clairvoyance, telepathy. And then things we're going to talk about today, like phrenology, graphology, and physiognomy. And don't worry, I'll explain what those are. But you want to hear a little bit more about them? Let's talk about really the four most prominent ones at the time. The first two are phrenology and physiognomy, and those were actually used as sales methodologies. And then I would like to talk a little bit about graphology, which is, we'll talk about what it is, but that was used in sales and recruiting. And then personality testing, which was used primarily in recruiting and hiring. Now, personality testing, there's a couple of these that are still in use in different flavors today. The last one, personality testing, is still found in popular workplace tools like Myers-Briggs and DISC and many others. But let's start with phrenology. So, Franz Joseph Gall has been credited with developing this idea of phrenology in the late 1700s, and it's the detailed study of the shape and size of the cranium, or your head, as a supposed indication of character and mental abilities. So, in a sales context, the thought was use phrenology to help salespeople adjust their approach based on the prospect's head shape. Yes, you heard that right. So, it was seen as such a shortcut that there was a lot of attention given to a noted phrenologist named Grant Noblo, who was credited with creating a science of selling, which takes phrenology, so that studying of the size and shape of the brain, and formally taking it to the sales world. He had a book, like I said, called Science of Selling. That title, by the way, was applied to many theories and philosophies, but this one was specific to phrenology. And not only was it adopted by companies, but the Ford Motor Company used it as its core sales methodology. Now, it's said, and I haven't seen it myself, I've been looking, but in Ford's 1923 sales manual, apparently there's a quote that says, "Sell the vehicle according to the shape of the prospect's head. High foreheads leave room for larger development and indicate people who are less likely to resist new ideas." It was so popular that Noblo was a heralded keynote speaker at that historic World Sales Congress in Detroit in July of 1916 that I talked about in an earlier episode, which, if you didn't listen, it was the first conference of its kind. It was attended by over 3,000. It was also keynoted by then President Woodrow Wilson, who was keynoting a sales conference in the middle of World War I. That's how big of a deal sales was. And Grant Noblo was one of the other heralded keynote speakers. So it was a big deal. So that's phrenology. Let's go to the next one, which is physiognomy. Physiognomy was the art of discovering temperament and character from overall outward appearance. So physiognomy was less about your melon, cheap plug for sales melon, but more about everything else, from your physique to your overall, human-facing features. So judging you based on how you look and then adjusting accordingly. I mean, what could go wrong with that, right? Well, I was able to procure a digital copy of 1840's Essays on Physiognomy. Yes, I said 1840. But the problem is it's over 800 pages long. I mean, I'm committed, but not that much. However, I was able to also track down the work of one prominent expert in the physiognomy space focused on the sales profession. And it's a PhD named Norris Briscoe. He was a PhD at what was then called State University of Iowa, which is officially called University of Iowa now as of 1964. But Professor Briscoe, he wrote a book in 1916 called The Fundamentals of Salesmanship. It had a broad collection of really solid advice. I mean, I like the book, but it dives deeply into this subject. It really, as I got to the chapter, he kind of took things off the rails a bit. And so for fun, this physiognomy I thought was really, really interesting, and Briscoe was all in on it. So here's a few of the thoughts and theories of physiognomy. Now, Briscoe believed, and I'm cool with this assessment, that no two prospects or customers are alike, and what makes a sale with one probably won't make an impression on another. Now, to him, physiognomy was like the ultimate shortcut. That it's about being able to size up customers quickly and decide how to handle them successfully. And so here's a couple of examples of what I mean, and buckle up, they're weird and confusing. He starts with a person's head, right? So picture this. Customers approaching. You are supposed to look at their ears and where they are positioned on the head. And so, for example, if they're positioned correctly on the head, which according to him was the head should be about 2/3 forward of the ears and 1/3 back. It means to him that there should be, quote, 2 parts of intellect to 1 part of animal. And he explains that the intellectual should control the animal. Animal propensities are situated at the back of the brain. Not quite accurate, as the reptilian, which is the animal propensities, are actually in your reptilian brain, which is in your core. I won't get too nerdy on it, but he's kind of right in terms of the intellect would be, in your frontal lobe, which is a little bit more in the front. But apparently, to him, the ear position, as it relates to the head, was an important indicator of that, which is also not quite true. He also theorized that if the ears are correctly positioned on the head, the person will be more intelligent and motivated more by logic and less by emotion or instinct or feelings. On the other hand, if the head is more round and the ears are about equal, it means they have stronger animal and selfish propensities. So in other words, you can assume that if a prospect or customer comes up to you and their ears are in the middle of their head, such a customer cares not for anything except his own interests. I won't get too nerdy on it, but apparently if you've got a round head, you're selfish and you should be sold accordingly. He goes on to talking about the face and says it's, quote, the most interesting thing in the world. From observing the faces of customers, salespersons should be able to read their thoughts and feelings. And these 2 great expressive centers of the face are really the eyes and the mouth. My favorite quote from the book on the subject, his definition of a stupid face. Yes, you heard that right. Briscoe says, quote, a stupid face has relaxed muscles, a half-open mouth, often one eyebrow higher than the other, and a vague and uncertain look which is directed at no definite point. That might be one where he's correct. Now, physiognomy as a methodology taught salespeople literally every single observable part of the body, how to assess it, then adjust your approach accordingly. I mean, looking at the eyes, there's a whole section on that. Eyebrows, forehead. Like apparently there's 3 classes of foreheads. Your wrinkles, your nose. There's 3 classes of mouths and the lips specifically. And that there's traits of character shown by the teeth, the chin, the hair color. I could go on and on. I don't have any idea how a salesperson could take all of that in and have the literal thousands of configurations ready in their head on how to engage. It's crazy. It's amazing. And no surprise, it didn't last. Now, enough about that one. Let's talk about graphology quickly next. And graphology is the study of your handwriting. So reading character in a person's handwriting. Now, at the time, handwriting was really the primary means of any kind of written communication. It's not like you had a ability to text or anything. So it was easier to get a handwriting sample, especially if you're recruiting somebody. You have them fill out a application by hand. The core of the methodology, according to another PhD, a guy named Paul Nystrom, who wrote a book called The Economics of Retailing in 1999, he has three basically elements to a formula. That first element is your thoughts tend to be expressed, your habits of thought are formed, and therefore expression becomes a habit. That's deep, eh? Well, the formula means that if you have a neatness of thinking, it would be likely that you also show it in neat writing. And on the other hand, if you have a forceful way of thinking, your writing would likely reflect that as stronger and more jagged. And last element that I wanted to talk about, that was graphology. Let's talk a little bit about personality tests and kind of wrap there. So before Myers-Briggs and DISC, there was the work of Binet and Simon. I'm sure I'm saying Binet wrong, but it was French, in 1908. That the two had published work in France, having developed personality testing for children, primarily to determine their mental age. Now, once doctors got a hold of it, American doctors, they enhanced it and then they sold it. And by 1919, these types of tests were being used by companies in all kinds of recruiting. Once the one of the enhancements was first proposed by Carl Jung. I don't know if that name rings a bell to you, but he theorized that humans have four primary motivators that determine their personality: sensation, intuition, feeling, and thinking. Now, Myers and Briggs, as you may have heard that one, they combine those and they theorize that everyone falls into one of 16 combinations of the original four. Now, is it interesting? Is it enjoyable to go through and do it? Absolutely. Do I believe that they should be used in any kind of official capacity in sales or hiring? My personal opinion is no. Really no more than disqualifying somebody for a job based on them being a Virgo or a Libra. So that one's a wild one to me, but that one out of the four is still the most pervasive. There's so many personality testing companies that are being sold and being used in organizations today. Now, there's many more oddities in sales history past, but today we're going to stop there. I just found this stuff to be really, really interesting. I would love to hear what you think. When I've talked about phrenology before, I've had a few people tell me it's also very real. Do you think it's real? Do you find credence in any of these? Please reach out. Let me know your thoughts on this episode, the podcast in general, and I would love to hear other topics you'd like me to dive into. I'm always good for doing some more research. So thanks again for listening. Please share, please rate and review if you get a chance. And overall, I just appreciate you listening. So thank you.